It's another edition of Angie's Book Club, and this young lady, I think, Nicola, I've been talking to you for a few months, haven't I? But we haven't quite got it together, but here we are, and it's all good, it's all good. Your book is called Victory Is My Name, because you are victorious. So I'm going to ask you why you chose the book name to be Victory Is My Name. Why did you choose that?
So I think it was a combination. First and foremost, the Greek translation of my name is Victory of the People. So Nicola actually means Victory of the People.
Okay.
And victory was something that I really feel like my journey has arrived at, but it's not how my journey started, and it's not how my journey looked like it was going. So the combination of the meaning of my name plus me feeling like I've come through a lot, by God's grace, I felt like it was just such a fitting name. And every single time I shared it with someone, they kind of went, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. So it seemed to just work.
Because I could say, Victory Is My Name, that's a cliche, but it's interesting that it's actually connected to your name.
Yeah.
And because of some of the things that you've been through, you are victorious. So maybe your name was chosen for you before you even knew it. Yeah. Nicola, I want you to, in your own words, tell me just one of the areas that you've been through and come out the other side that has given you the reason to say that you're victorious.
I think if I can, to centre it on my own journey, where I feel like your identity is your first relationship, isn't it, really? It's a relationship with yourself. It's a relationship with, like, figuring out who you were. And I think for such a long period of my life, I just didn't know who that was. And because of that, I allowed other people's labels to be put onto me. There weren't people necessarily in the spaces. I went to a very affluent school that didn't have many black children there. So I was in a space where I didn't see people that looked like me. And I was told my hair wasn't nice, my lips were too big, my skin was too dark. And so I was constantly being bombarded with negative messages about who I was. So I think, in a nutshell, my biggest kind of evolution is definitely coming through that journey of not knowing who I am, then not liking who I am.
Because of the labels that were put on you, because you didn't grow up, you didn't come into this world being hated. I'm just going to backtrack on something, because whilst I do understand why many African and Caribbean people tend to move out of what I'm going to call built up areas, concrete jungles, etc., and we tend to take our kids out to more affluent and more calmer, greener spaces, because we came from those green spaces. Let's not beat around the bush. But if you are the only one, number one, as an adult you can burn out, but as a child, it's almost as though when you go into certain areas like school, your identity is stripped from you because you're in the minority and you need to survive.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think my mum would say that was probably one of her biggest regrets. But like you say, it was with all good intentions. She wanted us to be around people where we had greater aspirations, where we saw that we could achieve more. She remembers going to her guidance counsellor in sixth form and them saying, we don't see you going to university, just get a day job. So she was like, I don't want my children to be limited by those voices. I want them to see they can be anything they want to be. And that's why she constantly, from primary school to secondary school, she was constantly putting us in spaces where she felt they were setting us up for the best opportunities. However, as I expressed to her when she let me move to my secondary school, which was so much more diverse and I flourished, it was harder because we were constantly, like you say, fighting for survival, defending ourselves, being bombarded with reinforcements of negative stereotypes of where we were from and what we looked like. I remember in primary school I was confronted by a teacher with a census form. I was 7 years old, and she told me to tick African because she had decided, despite me coming from Caribbean heritage, that I was African. And I had this argument with her at 7 years old going, I don't think that's what I should be doing. But it just goes to show, in those kind of spaces where people are seeing people that are not like themselves, there becomes ignorance, and there becomes walls and barriers become built up, and then you have to knock them down. It's hard.
And there are times, I will say, just that I'm just thinking back, because that whole African Caribbean thing, I can imagine when the influx of Caribbeans came to the UK, it was just one label. I can remember my dad always saying to me, why people keep asking me if I was a Jamaican, I was a Bajan. And it's, it's not a criticism, it was just an observation.
Yeah.
So how was the response welcomed when you explained to your teacher that was interpreted into an argument that actually I'm a Caribbean, I'm not an African?
Oh no,
we're not in any way, shape or form insulting Africans.
No way, absolutely not. But it was very much seen as I was combative. Out of 3 black girls in the class who were all of Caribbean heritage, so there was me, Bajan and Jamaican, there was another girl who was Jamaican, and another girl, I think she was from Grenada, they both ticked African. I was the only one that wouldn't. So I was immediately seen as a combative child, a child that, didn't conform, wouldn't just, go with the flow. I was always kind of saying, no, that's not right, and I disagree, and wanting to express myself truthfully and authentically, and that was very much seen as disruptive, I would say. And I think in a lot of ways I had a harder time at school because I was that way inclined.
I'm going to assume that I'm old enough to be your mother, so the chances are your mother and also your parents and also the parents of the other 2 children that just signed African were probably told, as I was told, don't argue.
Right.
Don't bring shame on the family. Do what you're told. And I interpreted those instructions and others under the umbrella of asking permission. So even in your fabulousness, even with your dynamics, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to assume there was probably a time where you almost apologized for being fabulous, apologized for being beautiful. Maybe the words I'm sorry didn't come out your mouth, but in your behavior. So then people knew they could maneuver you where they wanted you to be because it suited their agenda.
Yeah, I definitely would say there was a dimming of my light. I definitely noticed that other people got by when they didn't have this, what I call in the book, a Rosa Parks spirit, which is what I definitely feel like I had. I was that child that, wanted to make a change and speak up. And I realised very early on that brought about violence, that brought about resistance, that brought about me having a lot of trouble in school with teachers and constantly being outside the headmistress's office. And I started to notice that other people were not having to experience those experiences. And I remember at one point being outside the headmistress's office after having a physical fight with a boy who'd attacked me. And I remember thinking, is it all worth it? I was only about 8 or 9, but I remember thinking, is it worth it? I'm now missing class. I'm not with my friends. I'm probably going to get detention. Maybe I should just shut up and put up, and I definitely had phases when I did just withdraw and I did dim my light, definitely.
But how sad to have those messages and to remember those messages that are going through your head from age 8.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you've come through school now. You've come out the other end. So I'm going to assume secondary school was less, I'm going to say, traumatic.
I would say definitely in terms of the physical violence, I was really subjected to quite a lot in the playground, and particularly from boys. I don't know if it was just that I was more vocal because I was tall or whatever, but I was definitely a target. I went to secondary school and it was different, but it was different in a weird way. It was the first place I experienced colorism. So once I'd been in a space where I was constantly defending myself against people that were not of colour,
sitting back.
I was now in a space where I was like, oh, you're black, but you're not as black as us, almost. And I was called banana girl for being fair skinned, yellow girl, anything they could find that was derogatory about me being fairer skinned. And having to explain that to my white friends was quite unusual.
We can be our own worst enemies at times, can we? And I hate the term colorism. But the fact is, it exists.
Right.
And my question is, having been through what you've been through, how did you come out the other end of that? How did you explain that colorism amongst ourselves is actually an alarm bell and permission for people who are not black to continue the abuse?
Right, right. I think for me, I had to immediately identify a faction of people that didn't want to know me, that didn't want to know me for who I was, that didn't want to know me because of my personality. They wanted to judge me. And I had already experienced that in another way. So in some ways, I was almost built for this fight, because I was like, I've encountered this before. And sadly, I think it continues. But I think what I think is so important is that you then don't generalize. Everyone that's not fair skinned doesn't like fair skinned people, or there's this battle between the different shades. My siblings are chocolate brown, and we've never had any kind of competition or derogatory expression. So I'm quite intentional on not generalizing a shade of black people and just saying, those girls didn't want to like me. I did not have any light skin hang-ups or any kind of, I didn't carry privilege that I thought I was better than anyone else. They had their own hang-ups. They didn't want to like me. They didn't want to get to know me. And that's kind of where I draw the line. And that doesn't mean that I don't encounter things like that as an adult, but I'm just not prepared to give it any energy whatsoever.
Yeah. It's obviously strengthened you. At the time, it must have been very, very painful.
It was hard, yeah, it was hard. Once again, I was being judged by what I looked like, and it was just like, can I just be me?
Being judged by what you look like, by your own.
Yeah.
So to carry it from primary school, from not your own, to go to secondary school and think, whew, I can sit back. And then another fight starts.
Yeah.
But you've come out the other end.
There was no peace. There was just no peace. There was no sanctuary. There was no stability. And that's really disconcerting as a young child, you know.
Do you still feel it, Nicola? I know you said there's been healing.
I feel it for the little girl. I think there's a bit of a disconnect with, it's not me, but I think about that little girl, and there's often times when I want to just go back and rescue her and tell her she'll be okay and she's going to come out the other side. Because as a child, as you know, when you go from birthday to birthday, it feels like an eternity. So I'm sure there was times when I just felt like it would never get better. So yeah, there is definitely parts of me that kind of lament for that little girl.
Do you now see a responsibility with this book? Because you've said yourself it's touched people.
Yeah.
And there are probably areas of the book that you didn't want to open up about. And I would hazard a guess that some of those areas are the ones that have touched people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, sharing about my journey with depression and self-harm was so scary, because people that know me, they're like, she's bubbly, she's upbeat, she's outgoing, she's confident, and this narrative just didn't align with who people knew. And so I was so worried about how people would perceive me and the stigma of mental health issues. And as you've quite rightly deduced, that is actually the bit that seems to resonate with people so much, and say, look, I was also battling. I am still battling. I know someone that's struggling. I don't know how to help them. What would you suggest? How would I go about it? And that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely come with a responsibility, but also really helpful conversations as well.
You see, Nicola, I believe that we've all got something that somebody else can identify with. And there were areas of your book where I thought, hang on a minute, this girl knows me. This girl knows me. Growing up in a household where, you know, you don't want to go home because you're not sure, is there going to be an argument? Getting in from school, having dinner, making it to bed without there being an argument.
Right.
Phew, I can sleep. It's something I think most people have gone through. And what I really admire you talking about depression, mental health issues, because of course there's going to be, you know, challenges that come out of these things. Yeah. Also the trauma as well. I didn't want to talk about the self-harm because I think that's too delicate in terms of, because there's different levels of self-harm. Yeah. Some people have a drug of choice. Mine was Prosecco. Other people take it to a different level. So that's why I'm not going to talk about the self-harm. But I am going to say, I do think that what you've done is a very, very brave thing. And I think you should commend yourself. Because I also think as well, my demographic, I'm a firstborn British Caribbean. So my parents came from Barbados. I was then born here and given a set of rules, some of which I find very, very hard to break. Now, your demographics come along, and I do believe, and I can only speak for my daughter because you're around the same ages, yes, I'm going to do what mum says, but hang on a minute, she ain't happy. This didn't work. Right. I don't see the results. So I'm now going to hold on to the good, but I'm going to maneuver and try and find my own set of rules.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so can relate. Oh, yeah. I'm speaking to my mum right now. so I think there's a duty. Again, my mum and dad were born here, but both my sets of grandparents came from the Caribbean. So they were born in the 60s in the UK. But again, you know, the homes were Caribbean homes, and they had, you know, those kind of values ingrained in them. There's definitely a sense of duty in terms of, I mean, I think I shocked my mum once when I said to her, you know, sometimes if I'm just not in the mood to answer the phone, I won't, for my own mental health. And she was like, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
I was like, yeah, no, mum, I've got to do what's right, you know, right for me. She was just like, no, if you see your mother calling you, you pick up. And so that was...
You know where that comes from? That comes from her mother saying, you must do, because parenting... Especially, I'm going to say, not just Caribbean homes, ethnic homes, whether they be Eastern European, whether they be African, it's almost a sense of duty. And you do what your parents say because they're your parents.
Yes, yes.
Whether you agree or not, whether they're right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do think you can still maintain that level of respect. Well, I hope I've done it with my mom, but... You can say, I don't want to do that today because it doesn't make me feel good.
Yes.
Now, I'm just going to use my mum as an example. Mum, I actually don't want to go to so-and-so's house because when I'm around that person, I don't feel good. Yes, but it's...
You've got to go. So-and-so's passed away and you've got to go. Yes.
And I think because of their programming, they don't hear the side of the sentence where we're opening up about how we feel.
Absolutely.
It's more the duty side.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting, the dynamic as well, mother and daughter of our two generations.
Ooh.
I challenge my mum all the time. You know, she'll do all these big events and then she'll say she's exhausted and, you know, she'd love for someone else to take them on. And I say, Mum, why are you doing it? Oh, no, because someone's got to do it. I say, why has it always got to be you? And she's like, oh. Because again, she's never had the right to think, what about me? You know, it's what we do, it's what we've always done, it's expected of me. And I think my generation are challenging that a little bit and saying, it doesn't work for me, that doesn't work for me, it has to work for both of us. So yeah, it's interesting dynamic.
Sometimes I have conversations with my daughters, they're slightly younger than you, and my mum in this ear says, you can't let she say that to you. But then my daughters in this ear, I recognise they have a right to express themselves. All I ask that they do it respectfully. That's all I ask. But you see, I also think as well, and there was just one area, oh boy, where, let me say it and then maybe you can catch it, where about parents of a certain generation being wrong and strong and believing that it is their right to be wrong and strong. And that almost shuts us down.
Yes, yes.
So what do you do with those feelings that are shut down? Where does all of that go? Is that where the self-harm comes in? Is that where the trauma comes in? Is that where the depression comes in? Because you're muted.
I think that there is a balance. I think sometimes I always say to myself, you don't always have to say, sometimes just pray. So there'll be conversations I have with people and there'll be things that are niggling at me and I think, Nick, you don't always have to voice your opinion on everything. Some things you can just let go. But at the same time, if you're habitually in spaces where you are dimming your light, being muted, your feelings being invalidated, that's a problem, because they don't just evaporate, they go somewhere, they go to a vice, they need an outlet. So that's when we talk about, is it self-harm, is it drinking, is it rage, is it violence? You know, it has to go somewhere. So I think it's really important that we catch when we are habitually in those spaces that cannot be sustained. That becomes an abusive and toxic relationship if you're constantly being silenced and your feelings are not being validated. So I think it's really about picking your battles. There's times when I think, actually, I feel quite strongly about how I've been dealt with, or how I was shut down, or I've been misunderstood. I want to revisit that because it's not going to go away. And then there's other times when I think maybe that's just something you can take to your prayer corner and, you know, and leave it there. I kind of try to find that balance, but I very much am aware when I'm in spaces where I'm not being validated and I'm being shut down, and I will remove myself from those spaces to protect my mental health.
You talk mental health, you talk abuse, you talk trauma, childhood fears, depression, self-harm. And here you are.
It's a lot. Yeah.
What do you want this book to speak? What do you want this book to say to people? It's because to me, it's not just about reading from page 1 to the end. No. This is a tool that can help people.
Yeah.
Where do you want to see, this time next year, where would you like to be with this book? Do you want to do tours? Do you want to do in-person talks? What would you like?
I want to do it all. I want to do it all, Angie. I definitely want to get to the people that have read my book, that are really touched by it, whether it's speaking engagements, whether it's meet and greet. I definitely want to meet more people, because every time I meet people, their stories are so powerful. And someone asked me once, you know, did you ever think, why me? And I say, no, because every time I meet people and I hear their stories, that why me gets quieter and quieter, because it's not just me. So I would love for this book to open up the conversations around mental health. I would love to be more prominently advocating for that, you know, joining with charities, speaking to young women. I really want this book to get into the hands of boys and girls, men and women that have lived part of my journey and just needed something to validate and say, I see you, I hear you, you're not by yourself. Because they were the 3 things that I needed that would have made me just stop in my tracks. And I think a big part of that journey is thinking you're on your own. And as soon as you realise you're not, there's just so much comfort in knowing that other people are also experiencing what you're going through, and they get it. Yeah.
Nicola, you know I could talk to you for about another hour. My name is, Victory is my name. Nicola, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
One of my goals, and I'm going to do it, is to have an in-person event called ABC Live. Angie's Book Club Live.
I love that.
I'd love you to be a guest.
Absolutely.
I don't know when it's going to happen.
Let me know, I'm there.
It's going to happen. You can speak the language that my daughters need to hear.
Right.
I can speak to my daughters, they will hear mummy. And out of my mummy duties, of course, I'm going to say certain things. But when it comes from the areas that you're discussing, areas that I now believe your demographic are allowed to discuss and are encouraged to discuss.
Yeah.
Domestic violence, depression, self-harm, drinking, drugs, coping. You can speak directly to that demographic. And I hope your book flies off the shelf.
Thank you
And I hope that you have to wait for Amazon to reprint copies. No, seriously, I think it's such a great tool. And, you know, I'm going to say this on camera. I'm actually glad now that I've left my notes at my mum because it would have been quite a systematic interview.
Right.
Does that make sense? Whereas we just talked.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.
Nicola, thank you. You've been amazing.
Bless
you, and long may your success, and may this book reach so many people for the healing and the success, so that you can talk about that to people as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Take care, Nicola.
Thank you. Bye.
Nicola Morrison, Victor is my name, available from all good bookshops. Check it out. It speaks your daughter and your son's language.